Welkom by die Ligpunt Kerk podcast. As Ligpunt gemeente is dit ons begeerte om God te verheerlik deur disippels te wees wat disippels maak en 'n kerk te wees wat kerke plant. Geniet hierdie week se preek.
Well, I want to first say it's just such a joy and an honor for me to get to serve you all and get to be here. It's obviously an honor to be asked to come to a place like Thune and to serve a bunch of different churches. It's fun for me to get to do that, but I get as much out of being here as I do. I'm honored to be here. So it's a joy for me. It helps strengthen my faith to see what God is doing in other parts of the world, and for me to get outside of the United States of America into a place that's very different and similar in a lot of ways culturally, but also different, and just to sort of see and experience what God's doing. So thanks for the work that all of you do. I know that you're in this room because you're pastoring in a church, or you're serving in a church, or you're leading in a campus ministry and part of a local church. And so really fun to just be in the room with a bunch of people who are trying to serve the Lord in various ways. I do want to do something sort of unique today, which is to look at the book of Ecclesiastes. It's probably not the first place you go when you think about, hey, how should we think about the local church? You don't probably go to Ecclesiastes as your first book, but I do want to go there and spend some time there today. And for the reasons that Johan was mentioning, that when I think about the level of discouragement I have experienced over the past 5 or 6 years in various ways, and a lot of the pastors I've talked to who have experienced similar things, I actually think we need the book of Ecclesiastes in ministry more than we think we do. And so I want to talk about it for a few minutes with you. So I want to read Ecclesiastes. I want to read all of chapter 1. It's not a very long chapter. So I'm going to read this chapter, and then we're going to talk about it, and then we'll sort of look at the end of the book as well before we're done. So let me read from Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I'm going to use the ESV, so if you have a different translation, it'll be a little different, but here's what it says. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is the word of the Lord. I mean, it's an interesting word, isn't it? So I want to talk to you, as Johan said, about ministry under the sun. And if you're familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes, you know that this refrain, under the sun, is one of the characteristics of this book. I'm talking to mostly preachers, and so I know you understand your wisdom literature. And under the sun is this repeated reference, or this sort of phrase within the book of Ecclesiastes that just refers to life without reference to God. I think that's sort of the best way to understand what that phrase under the sun means. At the one hand, it's talking about mortal life on this earth, but it's also referencing life without reference to God. If you have studied a little bit about the literary structure of Ecclesiastes, you know that what most commentators think the best way to understand it is that there's what's called a frame narrator. So like Ecclesiastes sits within a frame, and the frame we find at the very end of chapter 12, and we'll get to there in a minute. But within that frame is all this language about meaninglessness and emptiness. So that the main narrator of the book is talking about the vanity and the futility of life. And then around that is this frame that says, that's all true unless God is in the picture. So without reference to God, here's the reality of what life is like. So I want to talk a little bit about ministry under the sun. And the simple thing I want to convince you of is that Ecclesiastes is more relevant to Christian ministry than you think it is. I don't think we apply Ecclesiastes enough to how we think about shepherding, to how we think about pastoring, to how we think about the ministry of gospel work in the local church. And I think there's an oversimplification that we are sometimes prone to. Maybe it's less prevalent here than it is in the United States. But the oversimplification that a lot of pastors in the U.S. are prone to is that faith in Jesus erases the sort of futility that Ecclesiastes is talking about. So like the way a lot of people in the U.S. would preach a book like Ecclesiastes is, it's a great evangelistic book because I need to tell all the skeptics and all the non-Christians in my city, see, life is meaningless, but Jesus, right? And so the way we apply the gospel when we preach Ecclesiastes is to say that faith in Jesus is what resolves all the futility and all the sort of skepticism of the book of Ecclesiastes. And that tendency can be even worse for those of us in gospel ministry because we do know the beauty and the richness of the gospel. And we know that what the New Testament says, that right, we have this treasure in jars of clay. Like we're aware that the New Testament has such a rich vision of how the gospel changes everything, and that we're called to proclaim the most glorious news ever told. And so that there is a richness and a beauty in that kind of life, a life that's given to gospel ministry, that we just realize, like, yeah, some of those rewards aren't going to come until eternity, but that's still a noble and a beautiful and a weighty task to give ourselves to. And so because of that, we sometimes imagine that because we've given ourselves to gospel ministry will always be joy-producing and relatively satisfying and even relatively fruitful because, after all, it's gospel ministry. And what I want to convince you of is almost but not quite. That's almost but not quite right, okay? I want to convince you that actually life under the sun, ministry under the sun, is filled with a lot more futility than we sometimes want to talk about. And that's okay. That's part of life in the world. And I want to show you that Ecclesiastes, I think, gives us a deeper sense, a deeper resonance or perseverance within some of the hardships of ministry, some of the futility of ministry, some of the emptiness of ministry. So if you're a student of the languages, you know that the primary Hebrew word used throughout Ecclesiastes is this word hevel, which is the word for breath or vapor. The writer of Ecclesiastes isn't just saying life is meaningless, like a freshman at the university would say, who just discovered Nietzsche, all of life is meaningless. What the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying is actually he's saying life is a mist. Life is a breath. Life is a vapor. It feels sometimes like you're trying to grab the wind. There's a temporariness to it and a lack of substance to it that just is. And so, when he says all is vanity and a striving after wind, that's the idea, that life is sometimes just trying to grab hold of wind. There's just a lack of substance to it. And I want to convince you that's true even for you and even in the work of gospel ministry. Life is like that, even for those of us who do gospel ministry. Let me quote to you from David Gibson, who you might be familiar with. He's a preacher in Scotland. His church is in Edinburgh. And he wrote a great little commentary on Ecclesiastes called Living Life Backwards. Here's what he says. The preacher is not commenting on what life is like without Christ. He's saying, this is just what the world is like. It's reality. It's the same for everyone, Christian or non-Christian. This is how things are. Being a Christian doesn't stop this being true. Rather, it should make us the first to stop pretending that it isn't true. So I want to convince you that what you need is a vision for ministry under the sun. You need a vision of what does it mean to do gospel ministry under the sun. And you need that because the kinds of seasons that you've been through maybe in the past 12 months are going to happen occasionally in ministry. Sometimes ministry is fulfilling and exciting and joy-producing and really fruitful. And sometimes ministry is hard and difficult and you want to quit and it seems like God isn't really doing very much. And both of those are normal. A few years ago, I met with a great young leader in our city. He was 33 years old, loved the Lord, felt called to plant a church, wanted to just get into ministry first. And so there was a church that had hired him as a campus pastor. It was like one of those churches that does like video streaming, so he was just the guy like press play on the video. But it was just like it was a first gig in ministry, and so it was his chance to sort of take responsibility for some people. And when COVID hit in 2020, giving dropped, and so the church just shut down the whole campus. And so he went from, you're the campus pastor, to like, you have no job in 3 or 4 weeks. And so when he met with me, this young aspiring pastor who had been so excited about getting into ministry was now driving a forklift at a warehouse, and that was how he was paying the bills. And what I want to convince you of is, and that's life under the sun. Those are the kinds of things that actually happen in ministry. And he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't commit any sin. It was just a function of some circumstances and a decision by a church, and then here we are, right? He's driving a forklift instead of getting to minister the gospel. That's ministry under the sun. So I want you to think back to your calling into ministry. Maybe some of you are in the midst of that, like this is still very fresh for you. But I want you to think back to, why did you get into Christian ministry in the first place? How did God call you into this? What did he use to sort of first spark and first provoke, maybe I need to do this with my life? For me, I was a college student, and I had gone to college to be an engineer. So I thought I was just going to, go get my degree and get a job after college and go be an engineer and do whatever engineers do, which I didn't really know what that was, but it sounded, my guidance counselor told me it'd be a good idea because I was good at math and science. So I was studying engineering, and what happened is God put me in this dormitory on this hall with a bunch of non-Christians, and they loved talking about God, the Bible, Jesus, spirituality. We would get in these conversations that would last for hours, and I realized, this is actually really fun. Like, I enjoy the opportunity to talk with these guys about why I'm a Christian and to help answer questions they have about Christianity. And it started to trigger something in me of, man, maybe actually this is more fun than being an engineer. And out of that, I got connected to a campus ministry. And out of that campus ministry, some of the staff there started to disciple me and invest in me. And out of that, they started to say, hey, have you ever thought about going into ministry? Maybe you should do that. Maybe the Lord's calling you into that. Would you pray about it? Would you consider it? And so I began to pray and think and consider that. And over the course of about a year, God redirected my path. And after college, I joined the staff of that campus ministry and served in campus ministry for a few years, like some of you are doing. And then out of that campus ministry, I started to realize, hey, actually the stuff I really like to do is preaching, teaching, studying the Bible, those kinds of things. And so God used that to steer me then into ministry in the local church. And so There were a bunch of people and a bunch of experiences and a bunch of sort of inner loves and desires that God used to combine to call me into Christian ministry. And then I got my first opportunity to serve on a church staff as a college pastor. And then out of that, I began to take seminary courses and I began to get interested in church planting. And people started saying, hey, maybe you should ask the Lord whether he's calling you to plant a church. And that's what led to the church that I pastor now. And I think back sometimes to what I thought I was signing up for when I was 22 years old, right? And what I thought I think we're all like this when we're young, but what I thought I was signing up for was like, to use American language, everything would always be up and to the right. Like the graph would always look like this. It's just always revival, always awakening, always people meeting Jesus. Just like everything would always be amazing, because in college, it was like I would just go talk to the guy down the hall and he would get saved and become a Christian and we'd baptize him. And in church planting, it was like, I don't know, I'm just like showing up and teaching the Bible and all these people are coming. And it just felt like there was this sense that I was in one of those seasons that just God gives us sometimes where things felt kind of easy and revival felt like it was happening. And I bet when you envisioned gospel ministry, that's why you got into it too. Right? You got into it for the joy of preaching the gospel, or the joy of discipling people, or the joy of seeing people's lives changed. You got into it because you wanted to see the kingdom of God move forward. That's why we get into these things. You know what you didn't sign up for? Futility and striving after wind. No one told you that was part of the deal. No one told you when you were called to ministry. You know what you're signing up for is actually sometimes it's going to feel like you're trying to grab hold of air and it just evaporates. That's what it's like. No one told you you're going to spend years discipling some people and investing in them and helping them grow in their understanding of the gospel. And then they were going to go on YouTube and start listening to some quack false teacher and end up leaving and going and following that person. No one told you that would happen. But it happens, right? No one told you that you were going to have people you love, who you invest in, who you sign up to do ministry alongside, and then they were going to leave your church because, I don't know, you made them wear masks one Sunday or something like that, right? No one told you these things. No one tells you when you get in ministry, hey, you know what's going to happen is some stuff that you actually have, it just makes no sense. Like, sometimes when sin is just like, yeah, we all know that sin is real. So like when it's really obvious that someone's struggling with a sin or a habitual pattern in their life, that's not as surprising to you, right? You're like, okay, I know that happens. What's surprising is when, you're discipling the person that they trust you and they've been walking alongside you for years, and then suddenly they watch something on YouTube and they're like, well, I think you've been teaching me wrong all these years, right? That just doesn't make as much sense. Those are the moments where you're like, well, we've spent like hours and hours and hours together, and I've invested in you, and the things I'm showing you, we're reading together in the Bible, and we didn't start doing this yesterday. No one told you that you were going to sign up for that. And do you know why no one told you those things? Here's why. Because they got their vision of ministry from the pastoral epistles and not from Ecclesiastes, right? I mean, where do we take people? We take them to 2 Timothy 2:2, the things you heard from me and trust a faithful, right? That's our discipleship verse. That's where we take people. We don't take them to Ecclesiastes and say, you know what? The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has already been in the ages before us. There will never be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. You're going to labor away and then you're going to die and nobody's going to remember you a generation from now. That's not what you tell people when you're trying to fire them up about Christian ministry. But that's in the Bible, and that's true. Right? Like I tell the people at Corumdale sometimes, because when you plant a church, you're trying to cast a vision for like, we want to see the city changed by the gospel. And I want our people to embrace that vision. I want them to believe that. But I also tell them, hey, you know what? 100 years from now, our church might not even exist. Like maybe we have great ministry for a season of time, and then, 100 years from now, none of us are going to be here. So maybe our kids and grandkids will carry this forward, or maybe the Lord will have something different in mind. We don't know. But according to Ecclesiastes, they're not still going to be talking about us. The number of us who are going to be a George Whitefield or a William Wilberforce or that kind of a leader, that's few and far between, right? Most of us are just going to live our lives and do what we can to serve the Lord, and there's going to be generations that come after us that aren't really going to remember that. So here's the simple truth I want to communicate to you. It's really simple, but I just want you to put it into your framework, and that is that gospel ministry is ministry under the sun, which means it brings with it a certain kind of futility. It is hevel, it is wind, it is breath, and you have to take that into account. It needs to be in your category for how life and ministry work. So I want to turn now to the end of Ecclesiastes, to chapter 12, and I want to read you how it ends, okay? Because I want to remind you that Ecclesiastes is a frame, and so we don't want to just read part of it without the rest of it. So here's verses 9 through 14 of chapter 12, okay? After the preacher has said all his words, here's the conclusion of the book. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Here's how David Gibson summarizes what Ecclesiastes is trying to tell us. He writes, left to our own devices, we tend to live life forward. One day follows another, and weeks turn into months, and months into years. We do not know the future, but we plan and hope and dream of where we will be and what we would like to be doing and who we might be with. Ecclesiastes teaches us to live life backward. It encourages us to take the one thing in the future that is certain, our death, and work backward from that point into all the details and decisions and heartaches of our lives, and to think about them from the perspective of the end. That's why the book ends with, fear God and keep his commandments, for God will bring every deed into judgment. So I want to help you do that regarding your ministry. I want to help you live life backwards with regard to ministry. A few minutes ago, I asked you to think back to your calling, how you got into this in the first place. Now I want you to think forward. And I want you to try and imagine, this is a very young room, so this is going to take some imagination for you, but I want you to try to imagine your last day in ministry. Okay? For some of you, that may be decades in the future. Try to imagine, none of us knows how our ministries are going to end or how our lives are going to end, but just try to imagine your last day in ministry. Maybe your last day in ministry will be the day that you actually pass away. There was a member of my church named Dick who filled pulpits all around Omaha. He was a member of our church, but he helped lead a ministry in jails and prisons, and so he would get asked to preach in all kinds of little churches all around the city. 7 years ago, he literally had a heart attack in the middle of a sermon and died while preaching. And it was sudden and tragic. He was 60-something years old, so he wasn't very old yet. And he left behind a wife and 3 daughters who were all members of our church. And I sat there with him in the hospital as they had brought Dick in. It was pretty evident that he wasn't going to live. And I sat there with him and I said, what an amazing way to die. It's tragic. But your dad went out literally preaching the best news that we have to preach. There's a lot of people who would love to just go out preaching about Jesus. That's actually a pretty amazing legacy, right? So maybe you end your ministry like Dick, literally preaching. Maybe you just retire. Maybe you serve the Lord for a while and get to an older age and you just step away from it and do something else for a few years. I have a friend named Stu who's pastored a church down the street from me for 4 decades. And he's just recently retired, and now he's like a pastor emeritus, still invests in some leaders and does some things in the church, but has sort of officially stepped away from being the lead pastor of the church and is in that season of life. Maybe like my friend who's driving a forklift, ministry just ends for you in a way that you didn't expect. Church closes down, can't pay the bills, have to do something else. But when that day comes, and that day's coming for all of us, I want these words from Ecclesiastes to ring in your mind. The big question is, did you fear God and keep his commandments? And did you teach others to do the same? That's the only question. The thing that's going to matter on that last day of your life or last day of ministry is, did you fear God and keep his commandments? And did you teach others to do the same? And that is actually what it means to be faithful and fruitful in ministry. One of the most interesting books I've read in the past few years is a book called The Patient Ferment of the Early Church. Have any of you read this book? It's by a historian named Alan Kreider. And the research question he's trying to answer is this question. How did Christianity grow from a marginalized, persecuted sect of 120 people on the day of Pentecost to 10% of the Roman Empire by the time of Constantine? That's what Rodney Stark estimates, is that by 310 AD, the Christian movement makes up 10% of the Roman Empire. That's 6 million people. So what Alan Kreider set out to do is he set out to ask, how do you go from, okay, let's not even use Pentecost. Let's use after Peter's sermon on Pentecost. So that one day when 3,000 souls are added. How do you start with 3,000 in Jerusalem and end up with 6 million? Like, how does that happen? How does Christianity literally change the Roman Empire? And here's the answer that he comes up with. He's quoting here a German scholar on how the early church grew. Here's his answer to how it changed the Roman Empire. If the Christians raise their children as Christians, and if a Christian man or woman in the course of one generation can convince one of their pagan friends lastingly of the truth of their faith, that allows us to explain the growth of the church in the first 3 centuries. Isn't that amazing? So what he's saying is there was no massive revival. There was just the slow, steady, patient ferment of Christians raising their kids to be Christians and influencing a few of their neighbors. That ought to give you a ton of hope for how the movement we're a part of can continue to transform your world. We sometimes want to think that like it's all going to happen in our lifetime, but actually the vision is if we just faithfully disciple people, and then they faithfully, with 1 or 2 people over the course of a generation, see lasting life change where someone comes to faith, that changes the world. So you don't have to raise up hundreds of leaders. I hope you do. That'd be great. But actually only raising up 2 or 3 or 5 is a huge, dramatic, world-changing kind of a thing. If everyone in this room did that, and if the next generation did that, and if the generation after them did that, our great-grandkids would have to raise a lot of money for some bigger church buildings, right? Like, things would be radically different. That's the story that research tells us. And that's what I want to remind you. That's why Ecclesiastes is in the Bible, because Ecclesiastes wants to work against some of our expectation that everything is revival all the time. And I want to remind us, hey, you know what? Sometimes there's a lot of futility in ministry. Life under the sun isn't everything we wish it was. And yet, God is faithful. Fear God and keep his commandments, because over time, that makes a difference. So I want to turn now to Ecclesiastes 9, verse 10. You might have noticed this whole talk is just an extended meditation on Ecclesiastes. But I want to read verse 10 and then give you 3 exhortations from this verse in light of everything we've said. Okay? In light of the fact that life is hebel, it's a chasing after wind, here's what you should do. I'm going to start at verse 9, actually. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to where you are going. Doesn't sound like the most encouraging verse you ever heard, but I'm about to show you why it is, all right? 3 brief observations. I want you to notice 3 things that the writer of Ecclesiastes is telling us in the midst of this exhortation, okay? In light of everything we've considered. First, notice the exhortation here to enjoy life. First 2 words of verse 9. Enjoy life. Listen, ministry can be frustrating and discouraging, and it can make you want to pull your hair out, and it can make you want to punch the wall. There's a lot of things that can be frustrating and sad and disheartening. But in the midst of all that, enjoy life. You're called to joy. You're like part of how we glorify God is by enjoying life. The vain life he has given you under the sun. Enjoy the meaningless life he's given you under the sun, because enjoying it is part of how you glorify him in it, right? Think about the difference between how a Christian engages the futility of life and how a skeptic engages the futility of life. For a skeptic, because there is futility in life, and because sometimes life doesn't go the way we want, people rage against God and say that proves that God's mean and God doesn't exist and life is dumb and life is meaningless, right? That's the Nietzsche answer. The Ecclesiastes answer is, yeah, life is futile, and you know what you should do? Enjoy it. Because God has given this to you. God has given you this life. You have the joy of being here. Come on, be sure to enjoy life. That's an amazing observation, right? So don't get so lost in the grind and the grit of ministry that you don't just pull your head up and enjoy a good meal with friends, enjoy nice weather, enjoy a cup of coffee on the porch in the morning, enjoy a conversation with someone about meaningful things. Like, enjoy life. Here's the second observation. Notice it says, because that is your portion in life. So the second observation is to focus on your portion. God has given each of you a specific assignment in his kingdom. And that's your portion. Every one of us has a different assignment in the kingdom of God, a different people that we're called to, a different work that we're called to, a different kind of thing God's asked us to do. My portion is at 87th and Pacific Street in Omaha, Nebraska, a really long way from where we are right now. And a specific little band of people in Omaha, Nebraska called Coram Deo Church. That's my portion that I'm to shepherd. Those are the people God has called me to. That's what I'm giving my life to, is that people and that place. Maybe your portion is a brand new church plant full of immature 20-somethings who don't give very much. Maybe your portion is a congregation full of cultural Christians who know a lot of right answers but don't have a lot of fire. Maybe whatever your portion is, enjoy that. Don't covet someone else's portion. Like, part of our discontentment in life is we're always looking at the church down the street and going, man, that seems like a really great portion, right? And you realize this language of portion is also used in the Old Testament when they allot the promised land. And the whole point is like, yeah, your tribe gets what your tribe gets. That's the part of the land you live in, so just enjoy that. It's cool. Don't look over at Ephraim or Manasseh or, the tribe of Judah and covet their portion. This is your portion. So work in the field God's given you. Live the script God's written for you. Enjoy the portion God's given you. Shepherd the flock among which God has made you an overseer. That's the calling, right? Enjoy your portion. Don't covet someone else's portion. All right, here's the final exhortation. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. That's verse 10, right? Whatever your hand finds to do it with your might. So here's, and notice how it ends. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, in the grave. In other words, you know what's unique about having one life to live is that you're going to pour your energy into something. You're going to give your might and your strategy and your wisdom to something. So whatever your hand finds to do, man, do it well. Pour yourself into it. Give it your best. Why? Because nobody does that after the grave. This is when you get to give your best. So do it. What a different calculation than we usually make, right? In America, we usually think this way, hey, give it your best. Here's why. Because your best will get results. If you work really hard, revival. Right? That's why you give it your best, is for the outcome. Because you want to be able to say, do you know why this happened? Because I worked really hard. That's why it happened. Glory to God, but also I did a lot of hard work to get us here. There's like something very self-advancing and fleshly in that, right? In America, that's the calculation, is if you work hard, the church will grow, the ministry will succeed, really good things will happen. Ecclesiastes says, do it with your might because you only get to do it once. That's why you should give it your best, because this is what you get to do. Your chance to apply work and thought and knowledge and wisdom and strategy to your portion, that dies when you die. So give yourself to it now. Give it your best. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. I think that's such a great exhortation of what it means to live life under the sun. And, it's interesting to think about when we think about the canonical sweep of the scriptures, right? Okay, Ecclesiastes, it's wisdom literature. It's in the Old Testament. It's before the cross of Jesus. So all of us who are preachers know, all right, this has to resolve at the cross somehow. This has to get to new heavens, new earth somehow. This is this is on a canonical trajectory. Ecclesiastes isn't the only book in the Bible. But if you want to think about the canonical resolution of Ecclesiastes 9, I think you find it in 1 Corinthians 15, where Paul says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Why? Because you know that in the Lord, your labor is not what? In vain. That's a callback to Ecclesiastes, right? Your labor is not in vain. How do I know that it's not vanity? How do I know that life under the sun isn't going to be meaningless? It's because in the Lord, in the resurrection of Jesus, God is making all things new. So he's pulling on this thread of, without God, without new heavens, new earth, without redemption, all is meaningless, vanity, striving after wind. But in the Lord, your toil is never in vain. So give it the best you have. Give it the best you have. So I want to convince you, we do ministry under the sun, and there's no way to change that. To use David Gibson's language, the coming of Jesus doesn't make that less true. What the coming of Jesus does is it gives us an eternal hope for how God's going to carry all of this forward and bring beauty and blessing out of it, right? So we, in the meantime, get the privilege of putting our hand to the plow and working in our portion and being faithful where God has put us and obeying his commandments and teaching others to do the same. And so I want to convince you that this might be the most discouraging motivational talk you've ever heard, but I hope it also fills you with a certain kind of persistence, a certain kind of perseverance that says, you know what, man, if revival isn't happening in the neighborhood this week, if church people aren't being really godly this week, if evangelism doesn't seem super fruitful this week, you know what, it's okay. That's okay. Because there are seasons where that will happen by God's grace. But even when it doesn't happen, God is still good, and we're still called to do this ministry. And we live life under the sun. All right? Let me pray for you. God, thanks for this reminder. I want to ask for my friends here the grace to believe these words and to apply them to how we think about ministry. Forgive me for the naive ways that I probably thought that ministry, because it was serving you, would just always be fruitful and easy. And thank you for the ways Ecclesiastes reminds me that all of Christian ministry is still done under the sun. We're still toiling away in this world that really does exist and that really is under the effects of the fall. And so help us do that with tenacity, with joy, with persistence and perseverance, and with grace. Give these friends here in this room tenacity and wisdom to invest their lives in the portion you've given them. Pray for our good and for your glory. Amen.
Vir meer inligting oor Ligpunt Kerk, besoek gerus ons webwerf op www.ligpunt.com of kontak ons gerus by info@ligpunt.com.